All right. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of The War Room, courtesy of YouTube. I am your host, Admiral Sigma Jones. My good and fellow compatriot on the side here, Logic's Finest, as one of our favorite commentators of the series. First and foremost, we just want to give a shout out to our subscribers. Thanks for listening in. Thanks for tuning in. We truly appreciate the love and support. Hope you guys are doing well here in America or elsewhere around the world tuning in. It's been one hectic weekend, but definitely it's been a very interesting side of developments, for the series, outside the series and everything. But yeah, just glad that everyone's here to tune in for this special episode we're going to do for the War series. But before I continue further, let's go ahead and introduce the main man who has no chink in the armor when it comes down to solid arguments. My co-host here, Logic's Finest. Good to see you, sir. How you doing?
I'm doing well, sir. How are you?
Not too bad, not too bad. I always look forward to more discussions here on the War Room, especially stuff that we take and digest a little bit, kind of go all over the place to kind of make sure we hit every single corners of these discussions, because it doesn't get better than this. World War II is definitely something that there's a history lesson, in and everything that goes on.
Absolutely, and it really never ceases to amaze me, as the old axiom says: those who fail to learn the lessons of the past are doomed to repeat its mistakes. So, the monumental global shifting occurrence that was World War II, the lessons never stop. I study it, I study it, I study it, and I'll more than likely study it for the remainder of my time in this current iteration on this planet, because the lessons never stop, and it does not matter how society changes or how the global gestalt changes. The lessons from World War II resonate.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially tonight's episode, this will definitely be something around your forte, Logic Fighters, because we are actually going to delve into Germany during the 1920s. And I'm definitely looking forward to this part of the series, because now we're going to look at a lot of these countries during the 1920s, from the end of World War One and the Treaty of Versailles all the way up into the crash of Wall Street in 1929. And what I find interesting about the 1920s is this is where we start to see a shift in how these countries started off after World War One, how they kind of got settled into whatever predicaments they're in, and then right before the crash of 1929, all of a sudden you see major changes in all of these countries. So for me, this is a great opportunity to really dissect how these countries were going about, what issues they were seeing during this decade, and really how our main players that we just talk a little bit of their early lives and everything, how they're going to start to make their moves in the 1920s.
Absolutely. The thing that fascinates me are the lessons as far as politics, because I hear so many discussions and so many arguments, and it just it really boggles the mind, because so many people, and they have these political viewpoints, and it's like they're they really they don't understand the nature of politics, because politics is constantly shifting mutual viewpoints, mutual interests. That's what politics is: constantly shifting mutual benefits. So if our interests align, we come together, we work together. When they're no longer aligned, we separate and we go our separate ways. When they align again, we come together, we work. When they stop, we separate, so on and so forth. It's constantly shifting mutual interests. That's the true nature of politics. Everything else is idle discussion and population control, and it's so interesting to hear people repeat the dogma and repeat these mindsets. And it's like, do you truly understand what it is that you're saying? Like, I could replace you with someone else, and it's the very same thing. Where are
Hmm.
your thoughts? How much of what you're telling me is actually you and what you're thinking? But I digress.
No, absolutely. You are definitely spot on. And to me, this is where I really would love to, as we kind of look at these countries, you've already brought up one topic we're going to go into, and that's politics. And really, that, as far as politics, deserve a stream of itself when we dissect all of these countries. But one of the things we're really going to look at, or excuse me, not one thing, there's four main things we're going to really dissect these countries to kind of see what was their views, how they saw things, and even some of the developments that goes on. So, starting with the Weimar Republic, we're going to look at the cultural side, the political side, the economic side, and then last but not least, we're also going to look at class and society. And so, I believe with these four breakdowns, we'll really get to see why these countries were starting to build up towards World War II with their ways of thinking and all. And then later on, especially in the case of the Weimar Republic, we're going to look and see how did Hitler and some of his compatriots that he started to get associated with, like Rudolf Hess, Heinrich Himmler, Joseph Goebbels, we're going to see how these guys played key roles during the 1920s as well.
It's funny because there was one name, and there are very few people. In fact, the masses never mention this name, Reinhard Heydrich.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone was taught Hitler was evil. He was the spawn of Satan. He was a monster. The Holocaust, 6 million Jews, the final solution. But see, here's the thing. A very well-known figure from history said, history is nothing but a pack of lies that we all agree to. Hitler one day went to his second in command, Heinrich Himmler, the leader of the SS. He said, I have a problem. I need to get rid of these Jews. I want to ship them here. I want to send them here. But realistically, who is going to take 10 or 15 or 20 million Jews? Like, what do I do? I don't know what to do with them. I just want them out of Germany. That's all I want. I want them gone. That was it.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Himmler said, Mein Führer, I will get back to you. Himmler went to his second in command, Reinhard Heydrich. He said, I will get back to you. 3 days later, he put a proposal on Himmler's desk, the final solution to the Jewish question. Himmler read it. He liked it. He gave it to Adolf Hitler. Hitler read it. He said, okay, I will greenlight it. Reinhard Heydrich created the final solution to the Jewish question. He created the Holocaust. He created the logistics, how it worked, how it would operate, where to build the camps. It was his idea to use Zyklon B in the gas chambers. It was his idea when they were not effective enough and efficient enough. Apologies. From their
Mm-hmm.
standpoint, not mine, from their standpoint, not efficient enough and switched over to the crematoriums. So, my question is, who's the real monster? The monster the person who created the product from top to bottom, including the logistics, and Hitler appointed him Governor General of Poland, where 90% of the concentration camps were, to run it in person. Is he the monster or was Hitler? Very simple question. Not absolving Hitler or anything that he did. My thing is, history is a pack of lies we all agree to. He wasn't the Jewish hating monster that we've all been told. That was Reinhard Heydrich. All Hitler did was approve the project. If we can remove the emotion and take an objective viewpoint.
Exactly. And I'm glad you brought that up and really emphasized as far as who was the mastermind behind the whole extermination. Because there's another question as we get further into discussing the Weimar Republic that I want the audience to kind of really dig down and deep. As we venture into this country's cultural aspects and even the economics that it was going through, when you see some of the decisions that those in politics made for this country, one can legitimately ask the question, had the Weimar Republic not hit economic downturn, especially right after the crash of 1929, would Hitler and the Nazis even rise to power in the Third Reich? And to me, that's where, again, like you rightfully pointed out, when you try to look at, okay, how is it that Hitler even got to this position of power? One has to ask himself, well, what was the country like before he got into power? And why is it that they was so in the downturn that allowed someone like Hitler and his compatriots to rise up in power? I think that's something that a lot of audience don't really pay attention to. They just focus on, here's a guy who just suddenly rise out of nowhere and just suddenly was this dictator monster and everything. And it's like, no. There's some background and some history to it. Once you dig deep to look at that background and history, you'll realize that, he wasn't really that much of a monster as the picture was painted of him.
It's very true. And that right there hits the nail on the head. One has to go back to World War One, the Treaty of Versailles, and the conditions in Germany from 1918 to 1921, and the creation of the Weimar Republic, the first democracy in the history of Germany, and the economic and later social conditions that existed in Germany that led to national social conditions that gave uprising to disgruntlement with the government and the social situation in the country, through which and during which there were several political parties and several strong leaders who had the ear of the people. The loudest and the most effective happened to be Adolf Hitler and his National Socialist German Workers' Party. But nothing happens in a vacuum. But again, if all that you're told is evil, the monster, Nazi Germany, that's it. And if that's all that you've ever been told, then that's all that you know. And so therein lies the problem with quote unquote history. If you don't study everything, then all you know is what you've been told. But how do you know if what you have been told is in fact accurate?
Mm-hmm. Very true. Which kind of segues into the next part here, because again, now we're going to get into how Germany started off right after the Treaty of Versailles. And for those who are new to the series, definitely check out the first ever episode of The War Room, where we talk about the Treaty of Versailles and some of the effects that it had on a lot of these countries, but mainly in particular Germany. Germany, without unanimous decision, definitely was hit the hardest from the Treaty of Versailles. To kind of review back from that previous episode, they were burdened with such retribution, which was astronomically difficult to pay back. Many was just in this mindset of that was the groundwork that really propelled Germany into the direction of the Third Reich, because essentially you're forcing a country that really was on the verge of winning the war. And all of a sudden they had to stop and decease, and on paper pretty much write on that they lost the war, had to pay this humongous retribution to countries like Britain and France and even the Americans, and essentially was collapsing Germany into third world status. And so now we're going to look into the Weimar Republic, as this is the aftermath of the Treaty of Versailles, and how this particular nation is going to try to revive itself from the ashes of World War One, and some of the political moves that it's done, the economics, some of the cultural standpoints that it established during this time frame. And again, like I said, in the same series of talking about the Weimar Republic, we're also going to see what Hitler and his type of guys are doing and why they made certain moves within the 1920s. Because again, the one thing that we want the audience to understand is there's a reason for everything. So when you look at history and you're like, why did this person think this way? Why did this person think that way? You can easily trace back the origins and see, aha, it was because of this incident. It was because of this person as to why later on down the road certain events happen. So again, definitely saddle up and really, as they say, get your notebook out, pen and paper, because we're going to really go into a lot of details of these countries during the 1920s and why is it that these figureheads made certain decisions that would put them into position of being leaders of this once in a lifetime event, if one could say World War II in that regard. So I did post it in the chat room, this particular website from facinghistory.org, and it's called the Weimar Republic Primary Sources. This is actually a pretty good site to get more details on a lot of the subjects we're going to talk about with the Weimar Republic of Germany. And so I really wanted to emphasize in this particular page the four subjects, that I mentioned earlier that are definitely we're going to talk about in this series. So the first part is culture. And it says Weimar Germany was a center of artistic innovation, great creativity, and considerable cultural experimentation. In film, the visual arts, architecture, craft, theater, and music, Germans were in the forefront of exciting developments. The unprecedented freedom and widespread latitude for varieties of cultural expression led to the explosion of artistic production. And so later on tonight, we're definitely going to talk about the cultural side of the Weimar Republic and how there was actually more of the forefront of the Roaring Twenties and really made a name for itself during this time. But Logic Finders, what's your thoughts at the moment as far as the cultural aspects of the Weimar Republic?
Well, excuse me. Yeah, so the arts and freedom of expression were given wide latitude during the early days of the Weimar Republic. Um, Marlene Dietrich, who is a Hollywood legend and icon, she had to leave Germany. She was already a global movie star, a film star. She had to leave Germany because after the collapse of the Weimar Republic and the Nazis coming into power, um, she did not. She didn't tell anyone back then, but later on in her life, she revealed that she was bisexual, so she had to leave. So anyone who was bisexual, anyone who was homosexual, they had to either go into hiding, end their careers, or out and out leave Germany under Adolf Hitler and his National Socialist Party. But in the Weimar Republic, again, artists, musicians, The creativity, again, had wide latitude. It was a very accepting culture. And they were trying to move away from, which I'm sure we won't cover in, well, since we're here in culture, they were trying to move away from the history, the long-standing history of Germany and aristocracy and landowners and dukes and duchesses and barons and baronets and social stratification as far as the working class, the middle class, the upper class, the nobility class. So they were really trying to move into a true democracy that sought to do away with social stratification. Now, one can certainly debate the how that can work because any society, even one that does away with supposedly social stratification, or to be more specifically, a caste system, all societies stratify themselves. That's why we have a socio-economic strata. But at least they were trying to move away from this is where you are in life, and that's where you can stay in life. More of a caste-based system.
Yeah, absolutely. and and I'm glad you brought that up because um, later on when we get into the societal and class side of the Weimar Republic, we're going to see how they view things differently far as social standings and how others are meant to, one could say, be put in their place, but not as drastic as compared to when the Nazis take over. But even now in the Weimar Republic, once we kind of get further into the cultural side of it, we're going to start to see how there was some things that they were viewing from a society as a whole that other countries start to have some influence, not only of Germany, but even by Germany. And I think that's something that is definitely not mentioned a lot, talking about Germany before World War II and even before the Nazis took over. Germany actually was very influential in a lot of aspects of other countries around the world during this time. And so I think reason why it's almost forgotten per se in regards to Germany's history during this time is because once the Nazis kind of took over in the 30s, that pretty much took over most of people's memory in regards of Germany. But us being historians, we're not leaving anything for granted. We really want to show our audience and those who will be listening in later on that Germany was already an influential country in and of itself. It may not have been a world power at this point, but it was still influential. And that same influential status still carries on even today. Being a world class medical institution, and even the likes of the automobiles and everything. Germany has its roots in regards to being influential around the globe.
Absolutely. Germany has a long history of the arts. One of the oldest Gothic churches in Europe is in Cologne, my adopted home, and a rich history of the arts, and of course, the Goths from the, from Germany, the ancient Germanic peoples, but um, nationwide, the country has had a rich history of arts and artistic expression, and of course, Germans are the best engineers in the world, but so there has always been a rich history of art and music and cultural expression. You know, a lot happened after World War One and during the creation of the Weimar Republic, which led to the National Socialist Party. So there was a monumental 180-degree shift, is what happened in those 12 to 14 years of the Weimar Republic.
Indeed, very indeed. And in fact, this article tonight is really going to kind of get more into the cultural side of the Weimar Republic. This article is called "The Culture in Weimar Germany on the Edge of the Volcano." And this was an article by Andrew Dickens that was published back in May of 2016. And so, to start off, it says Andrew Dickens explores the vibrant, experimental, and precarious culture that developed Weimar Germany in the 1920s and early 1930s, where figures such as Paul Klee, Kurt Weill, and Christopher Isherwood, were making art, music, and literature. The Weimar period has gone down in history as a period of remarkable artistic energy, a roaring surge of modernist art, music, theater, design, dance, and film, when the constraints of 19th century manners and mores were turned down, and experimentation of all kinds remade the cultural landscape. The surprising thing is that the legend is true, at least in outline. For an all too brief window between the golden 1920s and the early 30s, while Germany's political life was in turmoil and the country was being battered by an economic hurricane, the arts had rarely been so vibrant. It is no exaggeration to say that in the Weimar years, Germany was the most exciting place in Europe to be, possibly even in the world. And later on, I'm actually going to show a small clip of what the cultural side of Weimar Republic was like during this 1920s. But again, just as Logic's Finest pointed out just strategically, this country was already having such influence even before things started to go downhill for Germany during World War II. But even afterwards, Germany was really able to get itself on its boots and still become a world-class country. And I know for you Logic fans, you already mentioned how it's a second home for you, or excuse me, your adopted home. Essentially, this is pretty much right up your alley in regards to some of the cultural aspects of Germany that really to this day I personally believe is still being felt.
Absolutely. It absolutely is. Germany is such. You have to understand something. Europe and most of the nations in Europe, when they talk history, they're talking literally thousands of years of history and culture. You know, America is talking what, 400. So again, staying specifically with Germany, arts, history, culture, the music, the architecture. So there is a rich history, a very rich history there. And the Weimar Republic, one of the focuses was having people living their best life. So of course that means expressing every aspect of that life entails. So that naturally led to um, the musical expression, the film, art, literature, sciences, okay, the biological sciences, the technological sciences. So every level of human endeavor, they were highly encouraged to exhibit the highest expression of each.
Indeed. Well, this next section actually goes into a little bit of that emerging faith that Logic is talking about. So it says, in the words of one historian, it was a dance on the edge of a volcano. The entry of the United States in the First World War in 1917 helped seal Germany's fate, and the Allies did everything in their power to ensure that the country would never again threaten the balance of world peace. As well as demilitarizing Germany, the Versailles Agreement plunged the nation into a profound economic slump. Inflation rapidly became hyperinflation. By the late 1923, the dollar was worth over 4 billion marks. and unrest swept through the German states, with violent struggles between extremist groups from every point of the political spectrum. At the same time, the ambitions of the Weimar Republic, which was founded in 1919, openness and tolerance, underpinned by radical social democracy, created a new and more liberal atmosphere. The Constitution guaranteed every German the right to express his opinion freely in the world, writing, print, picture, or in any other manner. And German artists, many of whom had been exposed to modernist movements in France, Italy, and America, rushed to find forms that could reflect the tumultuous realities that surrounded them. One innovation emerged in Weimar, the very town where the 1919 Assembly ratified the German Republic's new constitution, and as it happened, the town theater, where Goethe and Schiller had once directed plays. The same year, the young architect Walter Gropius found a school that would unite the applied arts in a new organization he christened the Bauhaus, roughly House of Building Architecture. Gropius' vision was of a community which could collaborate in what he described as the new building of the future, which will be everything together, architecture and sculpture and painting, in a single shape, rising to heaven from the hands of millions of craftsmen as a crystal symbol of a new emerging faith. So again, as was mentioned before, pretty much this is where Germany had to kind of start over. At one point in time, it had its own kingdom, as like the other countries back then, like France and the United Kingdom and even Russia. But right after World War I, the kingdom was essentially ripped out from Germany, and they had to start as a new constitutional nation that would model itself a little bit after countries like America, France, and even Italy, as was mentioned before. But we're now starting to see that this was a golden opportunity for many young artists to really leave their footprint as far as in the arts and designs. And especially when it comes down to architecture, there's going to be some buildings that's in this article that even to this day, truly some magnificent architecture that really, even in this time frame, made Germany into a very first world-class type of nation.
Absolutely. Most Americans are not aware that Germany was a global cultural center. Okay, especially for arts, for architecture, for music, for literature. So, as a global cultural center, okay, that just further goes to show where the focus of the new Weimar Republic was. The thinking was, we've left behind the aristocracy and we've left behind the Kaisers and the empire. Now we're coming into a democracy, freedom of expression in every aspect of human life. This will improve life for for all German citizens. So one has to understand what the mindset was, what the nationwide cultural mindset was.
Yep. Indeed. And this is where, speaking from the cultural aspect, I think this is where we really start to see a lot of Germany's architectural designs, especially in the arts and everything, really start to emerge and really start to become renowned across the world. In fact, in this next paragraph, it says, offering tuition in a remarkable variety of activities: furniture design, painting, photography, typography, factory planning, ceramics, theater design, textiles, architecture, dancing. The Bauhaus was part artistic movement, part utopian social commune, and as much of an experiment as the Weimar Republic itself. Artists from many areas of Europe passed through, Painters like Paul Klee, Vasily Kandinsky, and Joseph Albers were on the visual arts faculty. Designer Marcel Breuer taught cabinet making, and the constructivist photographer and painter Laszlo Moholy Nagy offered instruction in metalworking. After moving to a purpose-designed building by Gropius in Dessau in 1925, the Bauhaus became celebrated for promoting a rational and functionalist style, elegant in its restraint, often using cutting-edge materials such as aluminum, chrome, and glass. Its products, Breuer's tubular steel chairs, Wilhelm Wagenfield's bulbous lap, brought high-concept modernism to mass consumers, and reflections of bold, clean Bauhaus lines are visible in product designs even today. And so here's a prime example of a poster that is the first Bauhaus exhibition in 1923, and it shows the school's experimental design, its use of geometric shapes, and bold primary colors. And then next, this is the Bauhaus School, which actually still stands to this day. Originally located in Weimar and later in Dessau, was an influential modernist art school which pioneered the blending of art, functionality, and mass production, paving the way for product design as we know it. So I'm actually going to zoom in real quick because I really want to emphasize the design of this art school. Keep in mind, this is an art school that was built in the 1920s, and as you can see, this was definitely a very modern architecture, and you can just tell by the designs of the glass and how it has such a reflective design from the sides. It really shows the innovation that the artists really took within the 1920s.
You know, that architectural design was not copied in America until the 1950s. That earlier picture that you showed of that poster that typified the Bauhaus design style, that is very indicative of the artistic style of Hollywood from the late 20s into the 30s. So there is a sci-fi classic film, Metropolis, one of the absolute iconic legends of the sci-fi genre. That film was made in Germany. For those who don't know what it is, I highly recommend, if you're a sci-fi fan, go look up the film Metropolis. If you call yourself a sci-fi fan and you have not seen Metropolis, shame on you. But I like it.
Oh, indeed. But like you said, these are designs that Germany was way ahead of the curve. And to think that, like you said, Hollywood and America itself did not start taking after these designs until at least the 1930s. So Germany was definitely, as some circles would say, the originators. And when it came down to architecture and design and the arts, again, the Bauhaus Art School, you would think, if you look at this picture, you would say to yourself, oh, this must be something that was like in the 1940s or the 1950s. And it's like, no, this is an actual building that was designed in the 1920s. No other schools, let alone no other buildings, was designed in this manner unless it was in Germany. So again, ahead of the curve. Next section talks about conmen, crooks, and capitalism. Across in cosmopolitan Berlin, whose gaudy, electric-lit streets were endlessly remarked on by visitors, even bolder experiments were being tried out. One of the biggest theatrical events of the Weimar period came in 1928 with the debut of, I may chop this, but I'm going to give it my best shot. Der Dregros Skinopera, also called the Three Penny Opera.
Yeah, Drei großen Opera.
Thank you, sir. See, this is why you have somebody who's from Germany that can read this much more better than I can. But yes, the Three Penny Company, billed as a play with music by its co-creators Bertolt Brecht and Kurt Weill. Based on John Gay's 18th century English ballet opera, The Beggar's Opera, the piece relates the story of the villainous but charismatic Macath, nicknamed Mac the Knife, as he dodges the authorities and attempts to cheat the hangman's noose. Though notionality set in the underworld of the 19th century London, Brecht and Wells' update satirized both the Berlin they knew, with its ready-made cast of cutthroats, conmen, and small-time crooks, and by extension, the entire capitalist system. Laced with bitter irony and propelled by Wells' raucous, jazz-inflected score, the Three Penny Opera scandalized many critics. One paper called it a noxious cesspool. But it became a huge hit, being performed over 4,000 times at over 50 theaters across Germany within a year. And defining the example of what Brecht had recently christened epic theater, in which the naturalistic fourth wall was torn down and the audience forced to question the nature of dramatic spectacle, it also broke daring new ground in its blend of high and low culture. So this is actually a play on set, a picture that they took of the Three Penny Opera. And again, as you can see here, it's definitely unique in its design. The caption says, in what was one of the biggest theatrical events of the Weimar period, Brecht and Wells' Three Penny Opera was a powerful satire of capitalist society. So, I think when we get a chance, we'll see if we can maybe find snippets of this particular play that was being broadcast in Germany. But again, the fact that it was such a box office hit that it was performed at least 4,000 times within a year, that again speaks of the innovations of Germany during this time. But your thoughts, sir?
Yeah, so at that time, culturally and socially, many Germans looked down on the capitalism and gross excess and focused on materialism that they felt America was about. Now, let's be clear, that was not hatred. It was not what we were told from, say, communist Russia, that they hated the evil Western imperialist capitalist pigs. No, it's not that. Germans felt that Americans were selfish and focused on materialism above all else and personal gain above all else, instead of focused on family, culture, the betterment of society, improving oneself, academic study, cultural study. That was their opinion. This was the national cultural mindset in Germany at the time. So when people say, you know, I won't even go there. I'm gonna leave it there.
Fine. Definitely, I got the feeling where you were going, but I definitely sensed it. Next, it says, Brecht had got his start on the thriving Berlin cabaret scene, and many other artists were drawn to this gaudy, seductive underworld with its indulgent approach to sexuality, ethnicity, and gender. In 1925, the African American dancer Josephine Baker, which we will talk about later on, brought her Revue Negre show across from Paris, where it was a rampant success, And 4 years later, the English writer Christopher Isherwood moved to the city to join his friend, the poet W.H. Auden. Isherwood found Berlin a revelation, not just creatively, but via the burgeoning gay scene, which both he and Auden explored with considerable energy and enthusiasm. Having fallen in love with a young German, Heinz Nettermeyer, Isherwood distilled many of his experiences into the autobiographical short novels Mr. Norris Changes Trains, 1935, and Goodbye to Berlin, 1939, which offer a cool evocation of life on the fringes of Berlin society. Quote, I am a cameraman with a shutter open, quite possessive, recording, not thinking. Isherwood writes in the first page of the second work, a sentence that seems to catch the casual hedonism of the period, at least amongst the city's expatriates. Yet another depiction of the world appears in Joseph von Sternberg's 1930 Der Blaue Engel, The Blue Angel, Germany's first full-length sound film. Hugely popular, it made a star of Marlene Dietrich, who played...
Marlene Dietrich.
Thank you, sir. Marlene Dietrich, who played a seductive cabaret performer.
Marlene Dietrich is a Hollywood icon. Any person under the age of 40 can most certainly be forgiven for not even knowing who Marlene Dietrich is. She's an absolute Hollywood icon, along with Rudolph Valentino and Charlie Chaplin and James Cagney and Cary Grant. Marlene Dietrich. And the reason Marlene Dietrich had to leave Germany, she claimed it was because the country was changing and the Nazi Party came to power. That was part of it, but she left out the other half. It's because she was bisexual. And the reason why I bring that is that it's funny how, again, removing the emotion from things, being objective. The creative world has always been a harbor of alternative lifestyles. So a lot of artistic types happen to be gay, bisexual, transsexual, what have you. So as you're seeing here, these things during the Weimar Republic, they were openly accepted, rather readily accepted. So artists, performers, thespians, laureates, poets, so on and so forth, they were readily accepted, much in the same way that Hollywood was up until 1940. But that's a whole other story, Tyler.
Yeah, indeed. And in fact, it kind of segues into the next subject of this history of the cultural side of the Weimar Republic, and it's called the Era of Decay. It starts off by saying, other artists saw the bleaker side of Weimar life. The expressionist painter, Otto Dix, haunted by his experiences as a machine gunner during the First World War, channeled his energies into sardonic and often ghoulish depictions of Berlin. The central panel of Dix's famous triptych, Metropolis. Hey, didn't we just talk about Metropolis?
It is a film-making icon, a legend, and a classic. If you call yourself a sci-fi fan, if you have not seen the film Metropolis, shame on you. Go see it right now. Google it, stream it, do whatever you have to do.
Indeed. And when I get a chance, I'm going to see if I can find some clips of it to show to our audience during this time.
H.R. Geiger, the Fritz Lang, who made Metropolis, a lot of the visual style of the film he took from H.R. Geiger, who, interestingly, decades later, James, no, I think, uh, Ridley, Ridley Scott copied for what we saw in the first Alien film. That's the influence of
Mm.
H.R. Geiger. What is now called steampunk, that look, that genre, comes from H.R. from the work of H.R. Geiger
Wow.
decades ago.
Wow, that's it. I did not know that till now. So, wow, interesting. Funny how, as they said, you learn something new every day. This was mind blown for me. I did not know that. So next it says the central panel of Dix's famous triptych, Metropolis, portrays a jazz club teeming with jitterbugging, bobbed new women, but its side panels tell a different story. In one, a wounded veteran stands by, his companion dead on the pavement. In the other, a crowd of scantily clad young females stream past, insensible to the suffering that surrounds them. The pen and ink caricatures of George Gross, like Dix, a member of the new Satchik Kit, New Objectivity movement, are even more uninspiring. A rogues gallery of plump businessmen, leering prostitutes, corrupt officials, and hollow-eyed down and outs. Two of the most remarkable films of the Weimar boom in filmmaking, Robert Wiene's Das Cabinet des Dr. Caligari, 1920, and Fritz Lang's Metropolis, also tend towards the realm of nightmare. Caligari plays up to contemporary fears about lustmord, sexual violence, with a gothic saga of a hypnotist who manipulates a patient to commit murder on his behalf, while Metropolis offers a dystopian vision of the future, set in a city segregated between wealthy industrialists and a numberless army of drones who toil in underground factories. Though hugely different in form, both works could be said to reflect the schisms that divide German society in the golden 1920s.
Yeah, I just really want to take a really quick second for those
Sure.
who don't know. The film Metropolis by Fritz Lang has nothing to do with the earlier work, also by the same name, Metropolis. The film Metropolis by Fritz Lang is a sci-fi film. That is the global filmmaking icon. That's one of the first dystopian films, the first uh, globally accepted mainstream sci-fi films, and it actually it had a high use of special effects, which were groundbreaking at that time. If you look at it, you're going to look at it, and you're going to say, "This looks like this could have been made in the 1950s, not in 1927." Groundbreaking.
Yeah, indeed, indeed. And again, I'm actually going to look to see if I can find some clips of it so we can show the audience exactly um, parts of the work of Metropolis, especially the 1927's version. Um, I think stuff like that will give the audience a clear example of a lot of the cultural aspects from this time period. But again, the film itself, especially from Logic's finest, firsthand experience of it, was definitely far beyond its years. And we clearly could see from the architecture and all, Germany was way ahead of itself.
And the overarching theme, as the author of this article clearly states, it was a reflection of the growing schism within German society between the haves and the have-nots, the
Mm-hmm.
factory workers and the industrial workers and the middle class and the upper middle class and the shrinking but still there aristocracy, and how this also led, combined with the stock market crash of 29 and the severe downturn of the economy which led to the uprise of several political parties, one of which being the National Socialist German Workers' Party.
Hmm. Indeed. And so to wrap this up, the last two paragraphs say, in any case, this world, golden or otherwise, was not to last long. After a series of running battles with the communists, right-wing groups gained the upper hand. Membership of the NSDAP surged from 25,000 in 1925 to 180,000 4 years later, and rose still higher after the Wall Street crash in October of 1929, which plunged the heavily indebted Germany into even deeper economic chaos. In the 1932 national elections, the Nazis became the largest party. Within a year, Hitler was in the Reichstag. Clubs and theaters were shut, books were burned on the streets of Berlin, and fierce campaigns against feminism, jazz, modern architecture, and much else were launched. Experimental art was held up to public ridicule, most infamously in the 1937 exhibition of degenerate art, which paraded works from what Goebbels labeled the Era of Decay. Among them, canvases by Klee, Dix, Max Beckmann, and Ernst Ludwig Kirchner. Many artists, particularly those who were Jewish, fled overseas, never to return. Less than 15 years after it had begun to stir, the first truly modern culture that Germany had known was brought brutally to a halt. So again, that article kind of gives a clear example of what the cultural aspects of the Weimar Republic was like. But even in that short little scene of things, again, we could definitely see how things were starting to play a major role in the likes of Hitler and those around him. You had a culture that essentially was trying its best to be more free-willed and was allowing people to be more expressive of themselves, whether rich or poor, whether of the same ethnicity or not. This was a time in the Weimar Republic where a person could really express their true ideals. But at the same time, it was almost like giving ammunition to the enemy, because eventually, when the Weimar Republic hit a downturn after the 1929 crash, the Nazis used that opportunity to say, ha, this is what happens when you let a country, so to speak, run too freely. Look at all this decay. And knowing Joseph Goebbels, he took advantage of that.
Yeah, so for anyone who's interested in reading and really going through the articles, they'll really understand how things got to the point that they did. So it's very important to understand it's not just as simple as moved away the Kaiser and the Kaisers and the empire was gone and the start of the Weimar Republic. 14 years of this grand social experiment. Stock market crash happens. Rather, 12 years. Stock market crash happens, and then you have 2 years of upheaval. Along comes Adolf. That's simple to say, but that doesn't even cover half of what happened. So again, you're moving away from centuries of aristocracy and kings. So democracy in Germany was literally a brand new thing. It was a grand social experiment, having people vote for themselves. So after World War One and the Treaty of Versailles, country was very poor. People had come back from the war. They had lost confidence in the government, which was the Kaiser. You had the Treaty of Versailles, which placed astronomical repayment demands on the government. At one point in time, the money was practically worthless. People were literally using money to heat their homes. They couldn't even feed themselves. So in the process of all of that, here you have this grand social experiment, democracy, the Weimar Republic. It took a long time to turn things around. Eventually, factories opened, jobs started, the removal of the social stratification of the country. All of these things, just earth shattering projects. Along the way, you have a lot of the clergy, it was felt, did not support the government. The academics did not necessarily support the government. They were overly harsh and overly critical of the government, while at the same time enjoying the unprecedented freedom that they found under this new government. How ironic. So, eventually, the stock market crash does happen. So now you're back to the same situation from 12 years earlier, and that now you have hyperinflation. People are out of work. Factories are closing. People are increasingly distrustful of the government. And you have the rise of charismatic leaders, one of whom happened to be one Adolf Hitler. So you have to understand how the social and economic situation deteriorated and got to the point where the society started to change and gave rise people being, we tried this grand experiment, and now here it is. I can't feed myself. I can't keep my children warm. I don't have a job. Now we have to repay these astronomical loans to America and France and Britain. What the hell is going on here? And here comes this charismatic person who's saying, you know what? Everything that the Weimar government told you they were going to do, I can do for you. Oh, and by the way, those people who own those jewelry stores and those fine goods stores, those J people, we're going to get rid of them too. Need I say more?
Indeed, indeed. Well, the audience is in luck because I was able to find the trailer of the 1927 Metropolis. And again, I believe this will give the audience a clear idea of just how innovative Germany was during this time period. And I definitely got one more clip before we end tonight's episode. But again, just to highlight a lot of what Logic's Finest is talking about, I think this trailer will give a glimpse of how just far ahead the 1920s Germany was. And even though it will be used against it per se in the coming decade, especially after the crash, again, definitely was ahead of its time in the arts and the architecture and everything. So without further ado, let's show the trailer of Metropolis 1920.
So I would tell people to go look on Netflix because Netflix had it. Unfortunately, as we all know, nothing stays on Netflix forever. They routinely cycle things in and out. But Metropolis is an absolute global filmmaking icon. If you are a sci-fi fan, it is required viewing. If you haven't seen it, shame on you. But you can see how the influences, how Hollywood was influenced by the German film and art and music scene. I'm sorry, except for music. But um, so that dystopian future, that was one of, if not the first films to depict a dystopian future. And for those of you who listening who may not know, the term metropolis means large city. It has nothing to do with Superman. That word metropolis means large city, which gave rise to the title of the film.
Honestly, just watching the trailer, um, y- you could definitely say the film was definitely ahead of its time. To me, it kind of like had a feel of the Wizard of Oz, but at the same time, it was definitely more sci-fi, and definitely was around before the Wizard of Oz became its own film. And when you look at it, it had that futuristic feel. It like the highways and the tall buildings and skyscrapers and everything, and it's just like wow, they was already thinking about this before, the 30s and the 40s when skyscrapers and tall buildings start to touch the skylines and everything. This film, in my honest opinion of Metropolis, definitely showed that yeah, this is this is what the future was going into. And to me, like you said, if you're a sci-fi junkie, um I'm not there yet, but I'm slowly becoming one. Automatically, that's a film you have to watch because that's one of the bedrocks of a film industry, I would say, that was definitely well ahead of the curve.
It absolutely was, which is why whether you are a specifically a sci-fi fan or you are simply a film fan, you have heard of the film Metropolis. You have seen parts of the film Metropolis. It is literally required study from people who I have spoken to who study film and who study film history and study film theory. When I say it is a global film icon, Metropolis is absolutely a global film icon.
Yep, indeed. Definitely just watching that trailer would have me want to look more into it. But before we end the series, definitely I had another clip that would kind of give you some ideas of what the Weimar Republic was like as we get further and further into studying the four pillars of this particular country. So tonight we just covered the cultural side. Um, Next we're going to get deeper. Excuse me. Next we're going to get deeper into the political side and the economic side. And then we'll wrap things up with the societal side in regards to how things were being treated as far as with class and as far as ethnicity and gender. And then we're going to get into okay, how did these four pillars play a role for Adolf Hitler and the like, and how this helped to build up uh, the Nazi Party and as well as Hitler's rise to power. And again, we're going to cover the same track for these other countries as well. But I really want to hone in on Germany. Start off with Germany first because this will give you clear ideas in regards to why we're looking deeper into the background of these countries as well as the background of the individuals who will play a significant role in World War II. So, without further ado, I'm going to play this last film that will give you some ideas of what German life was like in the 1920s, just to give the audience a little bit of a homework assignment, you could say, of make sure you use your pen and paper to write down some of the intricacies you see within this film. So, without further ado,
Joseph Goebbels, Hermann Goering, and Adolf Hitler.
mm-hmm. Yep. And those are some of the early films that they showed during those time frame of those individuals. And this is another thing that I'm really looking forward to this part, because in the 1920s, this is where we actually get to see film of these individuals. So we're going to see film of Adolf Hitler when he started giving speeches. We're going to see films of Joseph Goebbels when he started his propaganda campaigns. A lot of the stuff that you just saw and the audience just saw on that small little clip is just the tip of the iceberg. And I really want the audience, if they haven't already, just go out to YouTube and look at some of these films already, because once we start to look at these films, we're going to really digest it. And we're really going to see what was the imagery that was being portrayed in these particular films. And to kind of give an example, now in my opinion, just watching that clip we just saw, it really shows that Germany, despite a lot of its development in the arts and the architectures and films and everything, we clearly saw a Germany that was wrestling with turmoil. Now, what type of turmoil? Tune in on the next episode where we start talking on the politics and the economics a little bit. But clearly you could see from that film that Germany was definitely dealing with some things that was unrest from the First World War and the Treaty of Versailles, and how that unrest started to be the developing grounds for a party just like the Nazis and the likes of Adolf Hitler.
Absolutely. So, a few of the takeaways that people really have to understand. Country Germany, the country was in economic upheaval, economic turmoil. So you had the grand social experiment, first democracy in the history of Germany. Life has changed, life has gotten better. However, now you have certain people who are starting to complain about certain aspects of the arts. Um, the the stock market crash of 1929 happens. Hyperinflation sets in. People are out of work. People can't feed themselves. People are becoming more and more disgruntled with the government. So this gives rise to charismatic leaders to step in and fill that void. People stop thinking for themselves. Well, let me back up. Draw parallels between that situation and situations around the world currently. When you have social and economic unrest, that inevitably leads to political unrest. And when that happens, people invariably tend to take leave of their senses. And anyone who is charismatic begins to appeal to the lowest and base nature and base thinking of a populace. So then you begin to see the rise of populism, of nationalism. But nationalism is not necessarily a bad thing as long as it's not taken too far.
Mm-hmm.
And every nation practices nationalism to a certain degree. If you disagree, look look at your Olympics. Look at
Mm-hmm.
your anthem. Look at your flag. Every nation practices nationalism to a degree. There's nothing wrong with it. The problems are when it's taken to an extreme. National socialism, fascism, communism, totalitarianism. That's when it becomes a bad thing when taken to its extreme. So my point is, when you have social and economic upheaval, collectively people resort to their lowest base natures. People refer to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. When there is social, economic, and political upheaval, Maslow's hierarchy of needs tends to dissolve, and people tend to whether they people tend to focus on their lowest base needs. And once that happens, again, people become susceptible to charismatic leaders.
Mm-hmm. But I, I'm just so excited because if you really want to study social engineering, and this just my opinion, you could say I'm being biased and everything, but I don't care. If you really want to study social engineering and human psychology, the years leading up to World War II is like a gold mine of human psychology and social engineering. And we are going to see all of these countries in all of their retrospects, how they employ a lot of social engineering and really get into the psyche of human psychology. Like, to me, I'm just excited because we really get to turn this over his head and really look to see this is what people were thinking. Now, I'm glad you mentioned Logic's Finest about nationalism. Now, if you want to talk about extremes of nationalism, this is just my humble opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Germany has nothing compared to Japan when it comes to nationalism. In my
Mm.
opinion, Germany was you can kind of get away of being a little bit different in Germany in regards to having your set of opinions and everything. In Japan, if you did not show reference to the emperor, that was your head.
Mm.
So,
You know,
go ahead, sir.
no, please go right ahead.
I just want to say again, I am so excited because to me, this is where we really get to look at these countries. Again, we're breaking it down from decade to decade. So, how Germany is right now in the 1920s is going to be vastly different compared to Germany in the 30s, in the 40s, and even in the 50s, right after the war. And we're going to see the psychological shift of these countries all from the time of the Treaty of Versailles at the end of World War One, all the way up to the 1950s, years after World War Two, and to continue beyond. Like to me, that's what I find most exciting going forward from here.
It's funny. There's, as the old axiom says, it is easier to fool a man than it is to convince him that he has, in fact, been fooled.
Mm-hmm.
Over the past 4 years, a lot of people have thrown around words such as fascist, dictator, socialism, communist, monster. And I laugh because you have no idea what National Socialism is. You haven't seen it. You haven't even studied it. You have no idea, none, what fascism is. You haven't seen a fascist. Have you studied Augusto Pinochet? Because he's Spanish. His name was Pinochet, not Pinochet. But I digress. Have you studied Augusto Pinochet? Pol Pot, the killing fields of Cambodia? Chairman Mao in China? Not actual Nazi in Germany? Have you studied Stalin in Russia? So America hasn't seen anything like that. But see, when there's social, political, and economic unrest, people take leave of their senses. They lose their ability to critical and higher thinking, and anything that's emotional appeals to them, and they follow it and they regurgitate it. You can take the average person, average American. This is not limited to any one demographic, and you can replace them with any other person. What they're saying has been given to them. It has been spoon fed to them. So when we talk about social engineering and people talk about politics and they talk about this policy and they talk about this person and this instance and they throw around all of these terms. And I sit down and I look at this and I ask myself, you have no idea what you're talking about. None. You have been given an agenda and an ideology and it appeals to your emotions and you are repeating it. And the last thing before I don't want to, because I can start to rant. When people are placed in an uncomfortable situation, they tend to revert to their true thinking. They can tell you whatever they want, but the longer human beings are placed in uncomfortable situations, they revert to their true thinking. So you've seen that since 2016, and you especially have seen it throughout 2020. 2020, as I have said, is an anthropologist's dream because we got to see social engineering happen in real time.
Mm-hmm.
Historically, it takes 10 to 50 years to see the effects of social engineering. 2020, we got to see it in real time. Rant over.
Yep, indeed. And again, as a historian, I can look at some of the events that are going on right now. Honestly, beginning from 2018 up to now, I can look at these events and be like, didn't we have seen these type of things before? And I can go back in history and be like, aha, it happened around this time. Such and such country or such and such people were thinking the exact same thing. And this is why people truly underestimate that old adage of history repeating itself.
Yes. Yes.
Like when
You
I
know,
hear people, go ahead, sir. Go
no,
ahead.
go right ahead.
I just want to say this real quick. It's like when I hear a lot of these political talks, and especially around this time between the 2020s and now, where people are acting so surprised by what they're hearing on TV, or excuse me, what they're seeing on TV, what they're hearing over the radio. And I'm just honestly like, why are you surprised by this?
Yeah, you took the words right out of my mouth. My father, may he rest in peace, used to drill in my head. People have short memories. It took me 30 years before I finally have started to live enough life before I began to realize exactly what he was saying. Case in point, people love to say, people love to say, oh, this president can't get anything done because the Congress is fighting him. People have short memories. Every U.S. president since Abraham Lincoln has had control of at least one or both houses of the Congress for at least 2 years of his term. Every single American president since Abraham Lincoln has had
Mm-hmm.
control of both houses of the Congress for a minimum of 2 years that he has been in office. Every president who gets elected since Abraham Lincoln, almost every single time, every president has served, almost every president has served 2 terms. If it's a Democrat, the next president is a Republican. If it's a Republican, the next president is a Democrat. Yet the same insipid, vapid arguments repeat over and over and over again. People make the same inane arguments. No one pays attention. No one studies history. No one has a memory. People have extremely short memories. So, as a person who sits back and studies human nature, I'm amused by it. I laugh at these conversations because you make these statements and like, do you not remember what happened just 18 months ago?
Yes.
Everything you're saying now, you said 18 months ago. You either said the same thing or you said the opposite. Let that sink in. That's why, I don't engage in these conversations with only but a handful of people.
Mm-hmm.
Your thoughts, sir, please, because I don't, I don't want to start. I don't. mm, I'm,
Uh,
tr- I'm
and,
trying. I'm trying to stay at a certain level mentally.
Indeed, sir. And like you rightfully pointed out, I think we'll let the audience let it sink in for them. Um, Definitely come to your own conclusions, but me and Logic Finest, we see eye to eye on these issues. So, if anything, we give insight in regards to the politics, especially during this time frame, because what you're seeing today is no different than what was going on in the 20s, in the 30s, and especially in the 40s. So a lot of these political realms, societal realms, and everything else that goes on in these countries and all, we're just not surprised because as students of history, if I could use that term, because we have that appreciation for what goes on back during this time frame, how modern today's world is because of World War II. We're not surprised when you turn on CNN and this political party is doing this or that political party is doing that, and all of a sudden it's like the news of the day.
Right.
It,
Exactly. It's like, how is this the news of the day? Have you taken leave of your memory and of your senses? It absolutely boggles my mind when, again, I no longer have a dog in the fight. And I have to say up front, I don't support either of the two American parties. However,
Mm-hmm.
for every attack and claim that was labeled towards one Donald J. Trump, I have to ask you, well, do you not remember Ronald Wilson Reagan? Do you not remember George Bush? Do you not remember his son, Baby Bush? Were you simply not paying attention? So you look at President Harris. I mean President Biden. Do you not remember Barack Hussein Obama or William Jefferson Clinton? I mean, personally, I don't remember President Nixon or President Ford, but I do remember President Carter. Do you not remember? Everything repeats, and it's cyclical in nature. It's cyclical. Everything literally repeats every 18 months. Yet people's memories take leave of them. You know why? Because no one studies history.
Mm-hmm.
They are driven by their emotions. As I said at the top of this stream, people do not understand the true nature of politics. The true nature of politics is the constant shifting of mutual interests. That is what politics is. The constant shifting of mutual interests. When they align, we work together. When they don't, we go our separate ways. When they align again, we come together. And when they don't, we go our separate ways, and so on and so forth. You vote your interests. What guides you are your interests, not emotions. And that's how you manipulate and control a society. You control their emotions. After that, as long as you have people thinking emotionally and reacting, you're controlling them. So
Mm-hmm.
people think that they're thinking when all they're doing is they're reacting. They have become a human version of Pavlov and his experiment. I'm going to stop there because I feel it coming one again.
Indeed, sir. Well, we'll go ahead and wrap things up. Shout out to Aizasama for the $10 donation to the War Room. Thank you for that, sir. We appreciate it. Um, Before we pretty much wrap things up, sir, what's your opinion in regards to the cultural aspect of the Weimar Republic that we just finished up tonight?
The Weimar Republic was very interesting because it was a grand social experiment. The first democracy in the history of Germany. And we saw the effects, both positive and negative. We unfortunately barely scratched the surface. I highly recommend people to study the articles, study the history, study the Weimar Republic, and see what they created in Germany, a global center of art, of history, of fashion, of culture, of music, of arts, of science, of technology, of study, even esoteric study. So, and then how it started to go wrong. And no, it was not Hitler, it was internal. Because when you start a grand experiment, social experiment for the first time, there are several key areas that they did not pay attention to and ultimately set the stage for their own downfall internally. However, I look at a lot of the similarities because, as we keep saying, history repeats itself. History repeats itself. Whenever there is economic, social, and political unrest, people take leave of their senses, they become emotional, and charismatic leaders rise. And you see that across every country on this planet, none more so than the United States. Because Americans live in a bubble, they don't understand what's going on, they're emotional, and they have zero clue as to how they're viewed from the outside. So I understand why people think that. I'm going to stop there. Get me out of the way.
Well, like you rightfully pointed out, sir, we're just tipping the iceberg here. Um, for the audience that's tuning in and those that's going to be watching the replay, again, just fasten your seatbelt because we're really going to deep dive into this, as Logic Find has pointed. social experimentation.
You know,
And go
yeah,
ahead, sir.
I apologize. Let me say this: living abroad has affords me to see media from around the globe. As again, Americans live in a bubble, and the media in America has crafted this bubble. Okay, so I have seen throughout the entire election cycle, President Harris, President Biden, suffers from early onset dementia. If he does not have a script to read and you ask him questions, he gets lost. He has early onset dementia. And I understood now why would send people videos and, they make ridiculous claims like he's making mistakes, he's misreading teleprompters, he's this, he's that. Oh, because the American mainstream media is only showing you 2 or 3 seconds. They're not showing you the entirety of what he says and what he does. And you would see this man is literally losing his mind, which is he's almost 80 years old. That's fine. He has early onset dementia. However, you have to understand something. One, he has early onset dementia. Two, you were emotionally manipulated into making. You had two bad choices. Fair enough. This is what it is. But the questions you have to ask yourself are this: can you begin to realize now and realize how you were emotionally manipulated into such a level of cognitive dissonance that when you're looking at a person with early onset dementia, your mind is forcing you to make excuses for it? Now, deeper question is, if that's the case, who's really pulling the string? As a certain person who we all know and have a certain degree of respect for, look at the man behind the curtain. I'm going to leave it there. Good night, all.
Well, to add the cherry on top of that, sir, you will always quote it. If you want to know who runs the country, follow the money.
When you follow drug dealers, you're going to end up with drugs. When you follow the money, there's no telling where you're going to end up.
Yep. So to me, if you want to know who's pulling the strings, follow the dollar signs, because you literally can't go wrong there. But with that stated, just want to thank the audience for tuning in. We will definitely look forward to the next episode where we're going to get deeper into the politics of the Weimar Republic. And we're going to see what mistakes they made that, in my opinion, really gave Hitler a helping hand. And in fact, I really like this decade because we're also going to get a chance to kind of look at some of his writings within Mein Kampf for Adolf Hitler. And we're going to see what was the things that were happening during this time frame that he gives a heads up within Mein Kampf. And the thing about it is this: I think for a lot of people, they didn't take Mein Kampf seriously until after the crash. And even then, you had some people that was like, oh, this was just, a guy who's just giving his feelings and, want to give his opinions and everything. But it's like, no, there was some key things that happened during this time frame in the 1920s that really gave Mein Kampf kind of more of a futuristic feel, I would say.
Good point.
And again, even now, you have some people that are still hesitant to read that book and to really get a first-hand glimpse of Hitler's thinking at the time. Which, in my opinion, there's no other means of getting a glimpse of somebody's ideals and thoughts if you read their writing. And if you read their papers and everything. That's where you get an idea. And even myself, I had a chance to read some of it, and even I wasn't like, this guy's a monster. No, my thought process of, this was a man who was definitely struggling with something, but at the same time, and I'm gonna just say this and I'll leave it alone. But he definitely had some valid points. But I'll leave it there. All right. Well, with that said, just want to thank the audience for tuning in. Thank you for watching this episode of The War Room. Definitely tune in next month where we get into the politics side of the Weimar Republic. With that said, I am your host, Admiral Sigma Jones. This is my co-host, Logic's Finest. Until next time.
Guten Abend. Auf Wiedersehen.